Welcome to the NoDQ Roundtable. In this series, members of the NoDQ panel will give their answers to a wrestling question submitted by one of their colleagues. Let us now take a look at what today's question is.
My question to the group was, what would wrestling look like had Bret Hart stayed in the WWF, but it was Shawn Michaels who went to WCW in '97? So here's a setup to how to answer that question. And again, please write in the comments how you would answer this. So the setup is Bret returns in '96, just like he did. The timeline goes on as normal. We're now into '97, January, February, March, April. WrestleMania, the match with Austin, everything going on. We get to around April, May, where Bret and Shawn have their cat fight backstage. And Bret yanks a wad of Shawn Michaels' hair. Shawn Michaels runs into Vince's office, throws a hair on top of the table and says, "This is unwork safe environment, whatever." Leaves, sues, and gets his release granted. So we're at that point of the timeline around April, May of '97. Shawn Michaels goes down to WCW.
I do not think Shawn Michaels would have had a second career.
Oh man, this is going to be a very morbid answer, but I think Shawn Michaels is no longer here, and Owen Hart is still here.
Shawn would have succumbed to his demons, and we wouldn't have him around anymore. So I'm glad that it played out the way it did.
Shawn Michaels was not in a great place at the end of '97. And in '98, he got injured. If he had gone to WCW, you had that lifestyle, the guaranteed money. I'm not sure Shawn Michaels would have been healthy in WCW.
When you hear what Shawn Michaels was saying about how hard he was running with the drugs back in the 90s, and you hear how much Triple H really had his back, and then just eventually, just keeping Shawn, afloat until he eventually, with his family and his child is born, he finds God and everything. When you look at that, man, you almost wonder if Shawn Michaels went to WCW and, he's running with his crowd, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, X-Pac. You just look at how Scott Hall, a lot of his alcohol issues was getting out of trouble in WCW, and they always said Triple H was the straight one in terms of keeping everybody in line and being the designated driver and everything. But without Triple H there, man, I just don't know what happens. And I think Shawn Michaels' wife was in WCW, but even then you hear that the biggest thing he says that really got his act together was when his child was born, and his wife really drilled that in. So if Shawn doesn't have, a child yet, and he's running as hard as he is without Triple H, man, I just, unfortunately, I don't think it would have ended up well for Shawn Michaels.
As far as Shawn Michaels going to WCW in '97, I feel Shawn Michaels would have joined Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Syxx as part of the New World Order, and possibly been one of the founding members of the Wolf Pack. Syxx may not have gone back to WWF to become a member of the DX Army with Triple H and the New Age Outlaws, because Shawn, Hall, and Nash all would have still been in WCW. The only member of the clique in WWF would have been Triple H. And it's very possible that Triple H would have left WWF eventually to go back to WCW, because all his clique brethren were over there tearing things up.
To put it this way, I think that many of the people who left because of Bret Hart would have stayed, and the people like Triple H might have joined Shawn Michaels in WCW.
I think Shawn Michaels would have been what WCW needed for that must-see appeal, because he was a showstopper. Bret was so fine-tuned and capable of technically sound in the ring, but Shawn Michaels had it. He had charisma. He draws more people, I think. So I think, honestly, Shawn Michaels would be the WCW heavyweight champion. Bret would have been the WWF champion.
Bret Hart would have likely had a long career, but I'm not sure if he would have been satisfied with the direction that WWE was going in. Bret Hart might have ended up leaving regardless.
Bret Hart would not have become as disgruntled as he did in later years would not have suffered the concussion at the hands of Goldberg that ultimately ended his career. And I just think Bret Hart would be a much happier man. And heck, Owen Hart may still be alive, because I think Bret would have talked him out of doing that stunt at Over the Edge 1999.
I think that they would kind of been like a mirrored universe, if you will. Like, we would have seen Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Bret Hart at WrestleMania once again at 14. But this time, you know, Stone Cold would actually dethrone Bret Hart for the WWF Championship.
I think Bret Hart would have gone on to put Stone Cold Steve Austin over in a big epic rematch at WrestleMania 14. And I think Bret Hart, eventually, they probably team him and his brother Owen Hart up. Even if they do the whole Blue Blazer thing, you know, as Bret Hart has said many times, he would have put the kibosh quickly on making sure they are not going to do what they did at Over the Edge.
And then Bret Hart maybe would have won one or two more world championships, had that feud with Steve Austin, maybe have a big feud with The Rock. You never know. Maybe like WrestleMania 2000. I think that maybe would have been a one-on-one, The Rock versus Bret Hart for the WWF World Championship instead of that fatal four-way. I think those are a few things we could have expected.
I think the Attitude Era would have still been very successful. It would have just been very weird seeing Shawn in WCW.
I still feel that WWF would have won the Monday Night Wars in the end and overall. But yeah, it would definitely been a different beast, that's for sure.
That concludes this edition of the NoDQ Roundtable. What were your thoughts on the question? Leave a comment and subscribe to the NoDQ YouTube channel for the latest wrestling news and discussion.